I never thought one moment could change the way my entire family looked at me, but the truth is, the day I saw those numbers line up on the screen of my phone, everything shifted. I still remember the sound of the announcer's voice echoing through the tiny kitchen of my apartment. My heart raced so fast I could barely hear, but the words, "jackpot winner," seared themselves into my brain. I had just won $32 million. $32 million. The number looked so unreal that I kept refreshing the screen, convinced that any second it would vanish, that maybe I had read it wrong, or maybe I was caught in some glitch. But the truth refused to disappear. For the first time in my life, money, the thing I had chased, stretched, and cried over, wasn't a worry. Instead, it was suddenly overflowing, more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But with that winning number came something darker. I didn't celebrate. I sat frozen, my tea growing cold beside me. Not because I wasn't happy, but because I knew what would come. My family, my so-called relatives, my coworkers, all the people who had spent years mocking me, belittling me, dismissing me as naive or foolish. They would come crawling out of the shadows, pretending to care, pretending to love me. They would circle me like vultures, convinced I was easy prey. And maybe they were right. I had always been the quiet one, the one who listened more than I spoke, the one who gave when others took. To them, I was the soft-hearted fool who couldn't say no. But what they didn't know was that I had been watching, remembering, and waiting. Every insult, every betrayal, every moment they laughed at me for being too soft. This time, I wasn't going to be soft. This time, I was going to let them believe I was weak, only to watch their faces when they realized I was 2 steps ahead of them. Before I go on, let me just pause here. If you enjoy stories of betrayal, jealousy, and sweet revenge, stories where people like me finally turn the tables, make sure you subscribe and like this video. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Alright, let's continue. The first call I got was from my cousin Lily. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 6 years. Not since she accidentally spilled red wine all over my only decent dress at her wedding and laughed it off, as though ruining my night was nothing more than a joke. But that night, barely an hour after my name hit the news, she called with a sugary voice I didn't recognize. "Oh my God, sweetheart," she purred. "I just saw the news. I'm so proud of you. You deserve this more than anyone." Proud of me? The same cousin who once told me to my face that I'd never amount to anything more than a cashier? I let her voice wash over me, feigning surprise, pretending to be touched. Inside, I was already adding her to the list. The second call was worse. My father. The man who had left me at an orphanage when I was just 7 years old suddenly remembered he had a daughter. He spoke with forced cheer, asking how I was, saying he always knew I would do something incredible. The sound of his voice alone made my stomach twist, not because I missed him, but because of the audacity. He hadn't cared whether I ate, whether I had clothes, whether I cried myself to sleep night after night in that cold building. But $32 million was apparently enough to buy back the memory of fatherhood. "Maybe we could meet soon," he suggested. "Catch up on old times. The family should stick together." I smiled into the phone, a smile he couldn't see, but one that held nothing warm. I murmured a soft maybe, letting him believe I hadn't changed. Oh, but I had. The parade of calls and visits didn't stop. My boss, who had once humiliated me in front of the entire office for a minor mistake, suddenly acted as if I was the most valuable employee the company had ever had. "We should talk about a raise," he said with a straight face, as if my millions depended on his approval. My so-called friends, the ones who disappeared whenever I needed help moving, the ones who forgot my birthday year after year, were suddenly desperate to catch up, over lunch, their eyes flickering with the hunger of someone who could already taste the money. I played along. I let them believe I was overwhelmed, still in shock, too naive to know what I was doing. I nodded when they gave me unsolicited advice about investments. I smiled when they dropped hints about loans, vacations, weddings, mortgages. I listened as my aunt, who once told me flat out that I was a disappointment to the family, cried crocodile tears about her hard times and how I, of all people, should understand what it meant to help family. In their eyes, I was the same girl I had always been. Soft, gullible, easy. But behind my calm face, behind the polite nods and practiced smiles, I was already making my plans. The funny thing about money is that it doesn't just show you who people are, it amplifies it. It peels back the thin layers of politeness and reveals the raw hunger underneath. And my family, my friends, my coworkers, they were starving. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't feeding them. I was baiting them. Each interaction, every call, every fake hug, I stored it away, like stacking kindling for a fire I knew would burn bright and merciless. They thought I was weak. They thought I was dumb. They thought they could bleed me dry and leave me hollow. But I had waited years for this. And when the moment came, they wouldn't just be disappointed. They would be humiliated. The first cracks appeared at Sunday dinner. My mother's side of the family insisted on a gathering to celebrate me. It was staged like some grand honor, but the moment I stepped through the door, I felt the air thicken with greed. The way their eyes darted to my purse, the way their smiles stretched too wide, the way every question had an edge to it. So, have you decided what you're going to do with all that money? You must need help managing it, right? You're not planning to waste it on silly things, are you? Each question was a test, a probe, a way to measure just how clueless I might be. I answered softly, with vague words, letting them believe I was in over my head. My cousin Lily leaned in, whispering that she knew a great financial advisor who could help me protect my assets. I nearly laughed, as if I would ever trust her again. Dinner ended with my uncle, red-faced from too much wine, announcing loudly that family shares everything, and it would be selfish not to spread the fortune around. Applause followed, half-hearted but desperate, as if they could will me into cracking open my bank account right there at the table. I smiled again, quiet, unassuming, and in that smile was the secret none of them could see. They thought they were winning, but in reality, I was just getting started. The days after that Sunday dinner became a whirlwind of carefully orchestrated performances, as though every single person in my life had suddenly auditioned for the role of loving, supportive relative or friend, when in reality their hunger for my money practically bled through their skin. It was fascinating, really, almost like watching a play where every actor forgot that I, too, could see through the thin veil of their rehearsed lines. At first, it came in subtle waves. My aunt, who had once scolded me for being a financial failure when I couldn't afford to contribute to the family Christmas party, began sending me links to extravagant resorts in the Maldives and private villas in Tuscany. Her messages were always framed in the same manipulative tone. Family deserves a chance to celebrate together, darling. Don't you think a little vacation would help us reconnect? The words might have sounded sweet if they hadn't been wrapped in the poisonous undertone of expectation that I, of course, would pay for every single flight, meal, and villa rental while she soaked in the luxury. Meanwhile, my cousin Lily had apparently taken on the role of damsel in distress. Every morning, without fail, my phone would buzz with a new crisis. Her car had broken down, her landlord had suddenly raised her rent, her fiancé's dream business was falling apart before it had even started. The stories grew increasingly dramatic with each passing day, as though she believed the sheer volume of tragedies would eventually wear me down until I finally blurted, "Fine, take the money." But instead of pity, I felt only a deep, cold amusement. I responded with vague words that offered no commitments, short messages designed to dangle hope just long enough to keep her desperate. And all the while, I was storing away every plea, every manipulation, every desperate attempt. At work, things became almost unbearable. Mr. Callahan, my boss, who had once mocked me in front of the entire office for a trivial mistake, suddenly called me into his office, as though I were a valued partner in the company. His face stretched into an unconvincing smile, his voice dripping with fake sincerity as he congratulated me again and again, as if repeating it would somehow make his words genuine. After the empty flattery, he leaned in with faux casualness and said, "I've been thinking, with your new resources, we could explore some exciting partnership opportunities." There are investments we could make together that would benefit us both. He spoke as though he were offering me a lifeline, when in reality he was fishing, hoping to secure a piece of my fortune under the guise of professionalism. And then there was my father. His reappearance was the cruelest twist of all. For more than 2 decades, he had been nothing but a ghost, a shadow I had taught myself to live without. Yet suddenly he stood at my door, looking older, thinner, and infinitely more desperate than I had ever remembered him. He shuffled awkwardly, hands buried in his coat pockets, eyes darting nervously down the hallway as though afraid someone would see him begging. "Sweetheart," he said in a voice so soft it felt rehearsed, "I've been thinking about us. We've lost too many years, and I don't want to waste the time we have left. Maybe it's time to rebuild." The irony of his words nearly knocked the breath from my chest. Rebuild? Where had he been when I was 7 years old, crying myself to sleep in a cold orphanage because he had decided I wasn't worth the trouble? Where had he been when I graduated, when I scraped together pennies to survive, when I carried the weight of being completely unwanted? His sudden regret, now that I had millions in my bank account, wasn't love. It was greed in its most shameless form. Still, I let him inside. I let him sit on my couch. I let him look around my modest apartment with thinly veiled disappointment, as though he expected diamonds encrusting the lampshades. He rambled on about how much he regretted the past, how he wished he could change it, how he wanted to make up for leaving me behind. And then, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, he revealed that he was struggling financially and thought perhaps I could help him get back on his feet. In that moment, a sharp clarity sliced through me. Every single call, every single message, every phony smile, they weren't coincidences. They were all the same script with different actors. Nobody cared about my happiness, my safety, or my soul. They cared only about the digits on my bank statement. And I wasn't going to give them a single cent, but I wasn't going to simply slam the door in their faces either. That would have been too easy. It would have left them with bruised egos, but not the deep humiliation they deserved. What I wanted, no, what I needed, was something unforgettable. Something that would haunt them every time they thought of me. Something that would ensure they never again underestimated me. So I made a plan. That Sunday, I invited them all to dinner. Every single one of them, my father, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, even Mr. Callahan. I rented out a private room in one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, one that dripped with wealth in every detail. Crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains, silver cutlery that gleamed like mirrors. The invitations I sent were written with warmth, as though I were finally extending an olive branch, and their reactions confirmed exactly what I hoped. The messages and whispers that followed were brazen. "Finally, she's coming around. I told you she'd realize she has to share. She's too soft to keep it all to herself." They believed they had won before the evening had even begun. When the night arrived, I dressed deliberately. Not in diamonds or designer gowns, not in flashy heels or glittering jewels. I chose a simple black dress, elegant but understated, with my hair pinned neatly back and a calm expression painted on my face. I wanted them to look at me and think I was still the same girl they had always known, the one who could be bent and broken under their expectations. In contrast, they arrived like royalty attending a coronation. Brand new suits that still bore the faint stiffness of fresh tailoring, dresses dripping with sequins, earrings and watches, so shiny I was certain some of them had been bought on credit that very morning. They carried themselves with the smug certainty of people who believed a feast was waiting for them, not on their plates, but in my bank account. The evening began with shallow pleasantries, champagne toasts, and forced laughter. Every conversation circled back to money, though wrapped in thin disguises. "Have you thought about investments? You must be worried about taxes. I know someone who can help. A smart girl like you needs guidance to keep all that wealth safe." Each statement was a probe, a test, an attempt to measure how naive I really was. And I played my role perfectly. I nodded with soft smiles. I tilted my head as though deeply considering their words. I even let slip the occasional, "I'm just not sure what to do yet," which sent sparks of excitement flashing in their greedy eyes. Then, midway through the meal, my father struck. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished table, his voice booming with authority as though he still had any right to command respect. "We're all so proud of you, sweetheart," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the table to rally support. "And I think we can all agree that it's time to spread the fortune. Family sticks together, after all, and it would be selfish not to share what you've been blessed with." The room erupted in nods, murmurs of agreement, clinking glasses. Lily even clapped, her smile wide enough to split her face. My boss raised his glass toward me as if sealing a deal. I folded my hands neatly on the table and let the silence stretch before I spoke, my voice calm and measured. "You're right," I said softly, my eyes sweeping across their eager faces. "Families should stick together, which is why I've been thinking very carefully about how to handle this money. And after much thought, I finally made a decision." The air seemed to thicken instantly. Forks paused midway to mouths, glasses stilled in trembling hands. Every eye clung to me, desperate for the words they thought would finally open the floodgates. "My plan," I continued, letting the pause hang heavy, "is to give it away." A nervous laugh trickled from my aunt's throat. "Of course, darling. We knew you'd be generous." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Yes, but not in the way you think. You see, I've decided to invest in people who were there for me when no one else was. People who never asked me for a thing, who showed me kindness when I had nothing to give in return." Their faces began to stiffen, smiles faltering, eyes narrowing with confusion and fear. My father's hand twitched against the tablecloth. My boss's jaw tightened until the muscles bulged in his cheeks. "And, you know what's funny?" I added, my tone now edged with a sharpness they had never heard from me before. "I've been keeping notes. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every moment you turned your back on me, I wrote them down. And tonight, I brought them with me." I reached into my purse and slowly drew out a thick stack of printed messages, screenshots, and handwritten notes. Gasps rippled across the table as I laid them out one by one. Lily's mocking texts calling me pathetic, my boss's cruel email about how I was too dumb to ever get promoted, my father's years of silence punctuated only by the occasional demand when he needed something. Each page landed on the table like a hammer, a reminder of the truth they had all tried to bury. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of the chandelier lights, the soft clink of silverware against untouched plates. Their faces had gone pale, eyes darting between the evidence and each other, panic building in the cracks of their composure. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, and let the moment stretch until it became unbearable. "You wanted my money," I said finally, my voice clear and steady. "But what you really gave me was proof. Proof that none of you ever cared about me, only about what I could give you. And that's why not a single cent of this fortune is going to you." Their mouths opened in protest, voices rising in desperate unison, but I raised a hand, and the noise died instantly. "I've already made my choice," I continued, "and you're not in it." Inside me, a storm of satisfaction raged. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the weak one, the gullible one, the fool. For the first time, I was the one holding the cards, the one dictating the game. And they hadn't even seen the final act yet. But before I tell you how I delivered the ultimate blow, let me remind you, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect moment. Stories like this only get more intense from here, and trust me, you will want to see how this ends. Because what came next was not just rejection. It was revenge. The silence in that restaurant lingered like smoke after a fire, heavy and choking, as though every single one of them realized in the same moment that the future they had been greedily imagining was dissolving in front of their eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one squirming under their judgmental gazes. They were the ones shifting in their seats, their faces drained of color, their fake smiles slipping into something raw and panicked. But I wasn't finished with them yet. I let them sit in that discomfort, their forks frozen above plates of food they suddenly had no appetite for, until the weight of silence pressed so heavily on the room that it became unbearable. Then, with deliberate calmness, I leaned forward, rested my elbows on the table, and said, "I want to tell you all a story." The irony of it almost made me laugh, because for once it was me controlling the narrative instead of being the subject of their cruel jokes and whispered gossip. When I was younger, I began, my voice soft but steady. I used to imagine what my life might look like if I ever found myself with enough money to finally feel safe. I thought maybe I'd be able to buy myself a little house, maybe a car that didn't stall every other week, maybe even take a trip somewhere far away just to see what it felt like to breathe without fear of debt. But in all those daydreams, not once did I imagine any of you standing beside me, cheering me on or supporting me. Because deep down, I always knew that you wouldn't. I paused, scanning their faces one by one. My aunt stared down at her plate, pretending to be fascinated by the way her knife glinted under the chandelier light. Lily shifted in her chair, her hands gripping her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. My father didn't move at all. His eyes were locked on me, sharp and narrow, as if he were finally realizing he couldn't bully or guilt me into submission. "You weren't there when I needed you," I continued. "You weren't there when I was cold and hungry in that orphanage or when I worked double shifts just to scrape by. You weren't there when I cried myself to sleep, wondering what was so unlovable about me that my own family could abandon me. But you're here now, aren't you? Not because you care. Not because you love me. You're here because I won $32 million. A murmur of protest rippled across the table, weak and unconvincing. I raised my hand, and it died immediately. "Don't bother denying it," I said firmly, "because I have the proof right here. Every word you've texted me, every fake compliment, every manipulative message, it's all documented. You thought I was naive. You thought I was too soft to see through your games, but the truth is I've been watching all of you. And now the world will too." With that, I pulled my phone from my purse and tapped the screen. Instantly, the flat-screen television mounted on the wall at the far end of the room flickered to life. Their own words appeared, scrolling in giant letters. Lily's text begging for money, my father's plea about rebuilding family, my boss's email offering partnership opportunities. Each message was punctuated with photos, my father's absence at my graduations, Lily laughing as she ruined my dress, my aunt sneering at me for being a financial failure. The gasps were audible, sharp intakes of breath from people who had just realized their masks had been ripped away in the most public and humiliating way possible. "You see," I said, my voice steady as their shame filled the room, "this isn't just about me anymore. It's about showing you what you really are. And when this dinner is over, this presentation doesn't end. I've arranged for all of it to be published. Your words, your manipulations, your cruelty. Everyone will see the truth. Your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers. The world will know exactly what you are." The eruption was immediate. My aunt sputtered angrily, her face blotchy with rage. Lily slammed her glass onto the table so hard the stem snapped, red wine splashing like blood across the white tablecloth. My boss leaned forward, his voice trembling with fury as he demanded, "You can't do this. You'll ruin us." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Ruin you? No. I'm just giving you the chance to be seen exactly as you've shown yourselves to me. If the truth ruins you, maybe you should ask yourselves why." My father finally spoke then, his voice low and venomous. "You think this makes you powerful? You think humiliating us will make you happy? You'll regret this." I met his glare without flinching. "No, father. What I regret is ever believing that one day you might come back because you loved me. What I regret is wasting so many years trying to be enough for people who only saw me as a burden. But I don't regret this. Not for a second." The weight of my words settled heavily in the room. Nobody dared speak again, because there was nothing left to say. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress, and glanced once more around the table. "Dinner is on me tonight," I said lightly, my tone almost playful. "After all, I can afford it. But that's the only thing you're ever getting from me." Then I turned and walked out, the echo of my heels against the marble floor ringing louder than their silence. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp, filling my lungs with a kind of freedom I had never known. For once, I wasn't walking away as the girl who had been left behind, mocked, or underestimated. I was walking away as the woman who had taken back her power, who had finally made them see me for who I truly was. The following week, just as I promised, the story went public. Screenshots, photos, timelines, every cruel word and manipulative message was out in the open. The fallout was swift. My boss was forced to resign after his board saw his shameless attempts to exploit me. My aunt's so-called friends turned their backs on her, disgusted by her behavior. Lily's fiancé broke off their engagement, unwilling to tie himself to someone whose greed had been laid bare. And my father? He vanished again, though this time it wasn't by choice. He was shunned by everyone who learned how he had abandoned me as a child only to come crawling back when I struck gold. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the quiet, naive fool who could be pushed aside or taken advantage of. I was the woman who had turned the tables, who had shown everyone that beneath the soft smile was steel. And though I didn't owe anyone an explanation, I chose to use my winnings not for revenge alone, but for something greater. I donated a portion to the orphanage where I had grown up, making sure no child would feel as forgotten as I once did. I invested in charities that supported women clawing their way out of the same loneliness and poverty I had endured. And the rest I safeguarded carefully, not because I feared losing it, but because I finally understood the power of using wealth as a shield rather than a weakness. When people looked at me now, they didn't see a fool. They saw someone who had been underestimated and had risen anyway. And every time I thought back to that dinner, to the pale faces around the table, to the silence that followed when I revealed the truth, I felt a satisfaction so deep it almost scared me. They had wanted to humiliate me. Instead, I had humiliated them. And that is the sweetest revenge of all. So if you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. If you want to hear more stories of betrayal, jealousy, and revenge that ends with justice, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Because there are plenty more stories where this one came from, and trust me, the best ones are yet to come.